All right, we can go ahead and get started. It's a little past 1 o'clock. And before we begin, I want to show a quick video in order to introduce my topic. It's a quick 5-minute video. All right. My name is Tyrone Rivers, Jr. I am a child development doctoral student in the developmental Department of Educational Psychology at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And I work with the amazing Dr. Dorothy Espelage, I believe was a keynote today. The name of my presentation is Ritual Insults Among Middle School Students Causing Harm or Passing Time. Now, what are ritual insults? Well, they are a Black oral tradition that originated in Africa that can be defined as talking about someone in a group of 3 or more people through clever insults. Across the country, the activity is typically referred to by different names. It's called roasting in Atlanta, and on the popular urban media website, worldstarhiphop.com. In Chicago, it's referred to as heatin'. And in older generations, it was referred to as signifying and playing the dozens, the latter meaning to ritually insult one's mother or relatives. Now, because I grew up 20 minutes north of Metro Atlanta, I will refer to this activity as roasting. Roasting is popular in American culture. Examples of it can be seen on television shows like Martin, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, My Wife and Kids, as well as Everybody Hates Chris, Comedy Central's Roast, and also Tyler Perry's Meet the Browns. In the Black community, roasting is largely viewed as a competition. When 2 or more people or groups roast each other in competition, I refer to this as a roasting session, as we saw in the opening video. But a roasting episode, on the other hand, is when a ritual insult is unprovoked and unchallenged. For example, if a group of students were sitting in the cafeteria and a light-skinned, overweight person walked by, and someone at the table said to this person, said that this person looks like a vanilla donut hole, loud enough for this person to hear, if that person walking by did not respond, this event can be referred to as a roasting episode. Roasting episodes can, however, lead to roasting sessions, again, as we saw in the opening video. In roasting sessions, participants aim to recite the funniest joke and get the most reaction from their nearby audience or peers. The person who makes the onlookers laugh the hardest wins that session. Former leader of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, H. Rap Brown, wrote in his autobiography about the humiliating aspect of ritual insult contests and the intent behind them. This is what he said. In many ways, the dozens is a mean game because what you try to do is just totally destroy somebody else with your words. It's that whole competition thing again, fighting each other. It was a bad scene for the dude that was getting humiliated. For the dudes who couldn't defend themselves verbally, it was like they were humiliated because they were born Black and they turned around and got humiliated by their own people, which is really all they had left. But that's the way it is. Those that feel most humiliated humiliate others. The real aim of the dozens was to get a dude so mad that he cried or get mad enough to fight. Signifying is more humane. Instead of coming down on somebody's mother, you come down on them. But although the intent of roasting, according to Brown, is to arouse a negative emotional response from one's competitor, scholars note that the jokes are not meant to be taken seriously. Roasting is supposed to be taken a good sport, in other words, as researcher Geneva Smitherman says, it's not personal, it's just business. In America, the main intent of the first ritual insults was for Black slave parents to instill the kind of discipline in their children needed for them to survive in a hostile and racist environment. All of that said, is it safe to say that roasting is harmless? Well, in the Black community, roasting behavior is widely popular. However, scholars in the developmental literature largely overlook this activity, and it is not clear what is currently the function and outcome of roasting among early adolescents. So my team conducted a mixed method multi-study with middle school students to explore the contemporary dynamics of roasting. Study 1 included 12 Black males, 7 seventh graders, 5 eighth graders, who shared their thoughts, experiences, and the psychosocial effects of roasting through focus groups and a self-reported survey. Study 2 included a diverse sample of 141 7th and 8th grade male and female students who responded to a survey developed for this study that intended to measure roasting attitudes, behaviors, motivations, and also the relationship among roasting, depression, and student school sense of belonging. 55% of our sample identified as African American, 16% identified as multiracial, and 5% identified as Hispanic or Latino. The theoretical framework that guided our research stemmed from the aggressive communication model. This model suggests that aggressive communication consists of 4 basic communication traits: assertiveness, argumentativeness, hostility, and verbal aggression. Because roasting is most related to verbal aggressiveness, we propose that it helps to better understand roasting and describe the adverse effects of verbal aggression. Verbal aggressiveness is defined as attacking the self-concepts of others in order to inflict psychological pain, such as humiliation, embarrassment, depression, and other negative feelings about self. Both roasting and verbal aggressive messages include teasing, ridicule, profanity, obscenities, gestures, and nonverbal emblems. These messages also include attacks on one's character, competence, background, and physical appearance. Some of what we found in study 1 was that students roast others for fun, for revenge, to protect themselves, to defend themselves, and because someone does or says something that merits being roasted. Roasting to protect was defined as roasting others to keep from being roasted. In other words, the person initiates the roasting episode or session, while roasting to defend was defined as roasting others after being roasted. In relation to protecting oneself, one student said, if you can roast, then basically you're not gonna have no problems because people mostly all talk. They ain't gonna do nothing. They just all talk. So if they try to roast you, if you roast them back, they're gonna leave you alone, most likely. This student's comment hints at roasting's function as a survival mechanism, which goes hand in hand with researcher Edith Fobe, who noted in her book, Running Down Some Lines, that in Black culture, who you are and very often how well you survive depends so heavily on how well you talk. We also found that though roasting has benefits, it can also lower students' self-esteem, hurt students' feelings, instigate physical fights, and can disrupt a student from learning in class. When the first group was asked, what would school be like if no one roasted, they responded with boring and dumb. When the second group was asked the same question, one student said, no one would have any problems with anybody. The same student also said he definitely feels he will be able to concentrate more on school. Lastly, to avoid further victimization, some students conceal the negative psychosocial effects of being roasted by their peers. In other words, since boys are usually concerned with looking tough in front of their peers, the boys in this study don't want to appear emotionally or psychologically affected when others talk about them, as this could continue unwanted roasting. In study 1, there was preliminary evidence that roasting is supported by the verbal aggressiveness model. The focus group participants in the study who enjoy roasting are generally individuals who are high in verbal aggressiveness. They roast more often and are not as psychologically affected when roasted, perhaps because they do not view verbally aggressive messages, i.e. roasting, as hurtful. It can also be argued that developing thick skin from being roasted is equal to being desensitized to verbally aggressive messages. In contrast, those participants who do not enjoy roasting are considered low verbal aggressives. They roast much less frequently, if at all, and they are more inclined to be adversely affected psychologically after being roasted. Students who feel less self-confident after being roasted said they do not participate in roasting activities in order to protect themselves. That is, they do not initiate roasting episodes or sessions. Perhaps these students lack roasting ability. That may be a reason why. For study 2, the descriptive statistics were as follows. 75% of our sample does not like it when others roast them. However, 74% has roasted someone else within the 7 days prior to completing the survey that we developed for this study. 65% tries not to do or say anything that will make others roast them. This may imply roasting's ability to produce social anxiety. 53% feel bad inside after roasting someone else. For example, they feel guilty for saying what they said to the other person. 61% does not believe saying "I'm just playing" to someone before roasting that person excuses a potentially hurtful joke. In other words, the play context of roasting does not justify hurtful jokes. In the 7 days prior to our survey, 51% of the students roasted someone else because they were angry. 9% of these students roasted someone else 10 or more times because they were angry. 65% said when others start roasting in class, it distracts them from learning. 66% said teachers and administrators should stop students from roasting. And 71% said school will be better if no one roasted. Currently, a significant gap in the bullying literature includes the lack of scholarship surrounding ethnically diverse populations. In the Black community, roasting behavior is widely popular. However, scholars in the bullying literature largely overlook this activity. One recent bullying study of Black and Hispanic middle and high school students found that Blacks compared to Hispanics had higher rates of upsetting other students for fun, group teasing, harassing, and teasing others. Blacks also had higher rates of being teased and called names. All of these variables are characteristics of roasting. In study 2, students completed measures on traditional verbal bullying and physical fighting. Correlational analyses yielded positive, significant relations between roasting and verbal bullying, perpetration, and physical fighting. Attitudes supportive of roasting were also associated with greater verbal bullying perpetration and fighting perpetration. Further, holding attitudes supportive of roasting were associated with feeling less guilty after roasting sessions. Based on the results in study 1, there is some support that students who hold attitudes supportive of roasting are likely to roast others that are not their friends. Pro-roasting attitudes were also associated with less change in self-confidence when roasted by someone else. In contrast, feeling socially anxious when around others who are roasting was associated with less bully perpetration and fighting perpetration, but associated with greater feelings of decreased self-confidence when roasted. Further, reports of more experiences of general peer victimization were significantly associated with social anxiety and diminished self-confidence as a result of being roasted. Correlational analyses in study 2 also indicated that holding attitudes supportive of roasting was associated with less school sense of belonging. These findings support the notion that students who are disengaged with their school might engage in roasting in order to belong or pass the time. However, more research needs to be done with longitudinal data in order to understand this correlation. Perhaps roasting is a way for these students to distract themselves in class when A, they do not like the subject being taught, B, they do not like the teacher, or C, they do not understand how to do the work. Now, one of my advisor's current projects is a CDC-funded randomized clinical trial of a socio-emotional learning bullying prevention program in 36 middle schools. These are the objectives of the study, but I will not go into them here. But the main point is to see if the program's second step works and to enhance the dissemination process of it. The demographics for the baseline sample of the 3,681 sixth graders includes 52% girls and 48% boys, while the breakdown according to race includes 26% Black students and 11% biracial students. Here's a graph of the baseline levels of bullying perpetration in our sample. What I want to highlight for you all and for the purposes of this presentation is how the Black students have the highest rate of verbal bullying at 35%. Why is that? Maybe it has something to do with roasting. Perhaps roasting helps explain bullying in the Black community. To conclude, our mixed method multi-study represents the first effort to begin a discussion around culture-specific bullying. Roasting is framed within the context of a game where participants are expected to endure the pain caused by insults. These insults may include attacks on an individual's personal attributes, clothing, social status, or lack thereof, and family members, to name a few. When consenting individuals engage in roasting games, it may be interpreted as a fun activity. However, when non-consenting individuals become targets of roasting behaviors, these episodes mimic bullying behaviors in many ways. In order to help improve the social climate in schools, students and adults who favor roasting need to be sensitive to the line between consenting and non-consenting individuals and respect a non-consenting individual's wish to not engage in roasting behavior. In her autobiography, Ossie Guffey recalled a childhood memory of her grandfather telling her and her friends his thoughts on ritual insults after catching them play as kids. She writes, "When I was coming up, Grandpa said, I heard about that game, only I heard about it the way it used to be. And I heard how it started and why it started. It was a game slaves used to play, only they wasn't just playing for fun. They was playing to teach themselves and their sons how to stay alive. The whole idea was to learn to take whatever the master said to you without answering back or hitting him, because that was the way a slave had to be, so she could go on living. It maybe was a bad game, but it was necessary. It ain't necessary now." But given the value placed on high verbal ability in the Black community, a challenge to educators, researchers, and policymakers would be how to maximize the benefits gained from roasting while also eliminating its costs. Some suggestions for educators raised here are apply cultural responsive teaching by allowing for more student verbal creativity in assignments, for example, verbal presentations. Decrease downtime in classrooms where roasting is an issue because boredom fuels roasting perpetration. Implement a zero tolerance policy for roasting in classrooms. There is usually zero tolerance for saying gay and homo to describe things or people, but there is nothing to prevent a student from tearing down a classmate's self-esteem through roasting. This should not be the case. Teachers should have candid discussions with students about roasting, that is, how it started, why it started, its place in society, and its power to hurt others. Just because the activity is portrayed as harmless in the media does not make it so. And lastly, adults in the school need to set the example. If the adults are roasting each other and also the students, they cannot expect for the students to refrain from roasting others either. I want to thank my advisor, Dr. Espelage, our lab, Joy Marin, John Elliott, Lisa De La Rue, Lily Ortega, and everyone else involved in the lab. I also want to thank my friends who offered their valued perspectives on this research. And finally, this research was supported by the CDC. And thank you all.